You are never more alone than in a hotel room at midnight. Think about it. The walls around you have held thousands of strangers. People who wept in that room, and people who celebrated, and people who lay awake at 3 a.m. staring at the same ceiling you're staring at right now, turning over the same dark thoughts, listening to the same silence press itself against the windows. Every hotel room is a palimpsest, layer upon layer of human presence, each one overwritten by the next, each one supposedly gone. Supposedly. Hotels are the only buildings in the world that are designed to feel like they belong to you and don't. That bed, that bathroom, that view from the window, for the 48 hours of your booking, they are yours. And then the door closes behind you and the room is reset and the next person arrives and the room is theirs. And so on for decades, for a century sometimes. The same four walls holding the weight of everyone who ever lay in that bed. Everyone who ever stood at that window, everyone who ever turned out that light and lay in that dark and tried to sleep. Some of them never checked out. Tonight I'm going to share 10 accounts from 10 guests, people who booked ordinary rooms in buildings with extraordinary histories and who encountered something they were not prepared for, something the concierge didn't mention, something the 5-star rating on the booking site had no category for. Some of these hotels are still operating, some have been demolished, some, and I want you to note this, have been renovated, renamed, rebranded, new lobby, new paint, new name on the awning. Same rooms, same walls. The next time you check into a hotel, the next time you set your bag down and sit on the bed and look around at the room that is temporarily yours, I want you to remember something. You are not the first person to sit on that bed. And depending on the hotel, you may not be alone. Let's begin. Open Book Chapter 1, Room 217. The Belmont Grand opened in 1912. It is the kind of hotel that announces itself before you arrive. You see it from the highway, rising above the Asheville skyline with the particular confidence of a building that has been the most impressive thing in its vicinity for over a century. 12 stories of Boart's limestone, a copper-roofed tower at the northeast corner gone green with age, the original marquee still intact and lit in warm white, the revolving door still the original brass and glass that has admitted guests since the year before the First World War. Caroline checked in on a Tuesday afternoon in October for a 3-day HR conference. She'd stayed at the Belmont once before, years ago, for her honeymoon. That stay had been perfect. The Belmont was the kind of hotel that made everything feel elevated, breakfast tasted better, sleep came easier. Even the light through the tall windows had a quality that ordinary rooms didn't achieve. She had requested the same wing. She was given room 217. The room was everything the Belmont promised. High ceiling, original crown molding, a 4-poster bed that was absolutely not original but had been selected to look as if it was, windows overlooking the rear garden, a clawfoot tub in the bathroom that was at least 80 years old and had been refinished 3 times and was still extraordinary. Caroline unpacked, showered, dressed for the opening reception downstairs, and left the room in a state of contented anticipation. She came back at 11 p.m., full of conference wine and industry conversation, and got into the 4-poster bed and fell asleep. She woke at 2:47 a.m. The room was cold, not the imprecise cold of a thermostat turned too low specific cold, the kind that has a location, a direction, coming from the bathroom. She lay still for a moment, determining whether she was fully awake, whether this was the disorientation of an unfamiliar bed. She was fully awake. The cold was real. She reached for the bedside lamp. The bathroom door, which she had left open, was closed. She was certain she'd left it open. She had a habit with bathroom doors in hotels. She always left them open, a vestige of childhood fear of enclosed dark spaces that she had never entirely grown past. She had left it open. It was closed. She sat up. She reached for the lamp switch and the lamp clicked but didn't light. She tried it 3 times. Nothing. She picked up her phone and the phone's screen, normally instant, took 4 full seconds to illuminate, as if the device were waking from something deeper than sleep mode. By the phone's light she could see the room. The closed bathroom door. The condensation on the window. It was a cold night outside, but not so cold it should be condensating on the interior glass. She could see her breath. Not the faint suggestion of breath on a cool night. Her actual breath, white and visible, in a room that 20 minutes ago had been perfectly warm. She got out of bed. She crossed the room to the bathroom door. She put her hand on the knob. The knob was cold enough to sting. She opened the door. The bathroom was dark. Her phone's light caught the mirror above the sink, the clawfoot tub, the tile. She reached for the light switch inside the bathroom door. The bathroom light came on. The bathroom was empty, except for the tub. The clawfoot tub, which she had drained and left empty after her shower, was full. Full of water. Cold water. She could see it wasn't steaming, wasn't warm, wasn't a situation where the taps had been accidentally left running. The tub was full of cold water, still and flat as glass, the surface undisturbed. And in the surface of the water, in the reflection, the bathroom ceiling looked different. The light fitting above the mirror, which was a period reproduction fixture with a warm amber bulb, was reflected in the water as something older. Something that might have been a gas fitting, the kind with a mantle rather than a bulb. A different light entirely, from a different era. Caroline turned off the bathroom light, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed with her phone and called the front desk. The night manager, a young man she described as professionally composed in the specific way of hotel staff who have received this call before, asked if she was all right, asked if she would like to be moved to a different room, and when she said yes, please, was at her door with a cart and an apology within 4 minutes. He moved her to room 314. He did not comment on room 217. He wished her a good night with perfect neutrality. In the morning at breakfast, Caroline mentioned the incident to a colleague who had stayed at the Belmont several times. The colleague said, "Oh, you got 217. Yeah, I should have warned you." Caroline said, "You know about that room?" The colleague said, "Everyone who stays here regularly knows about 217. The story is a woman died in the bathtub in 1931. She was a guest, young woman, alone, traveling. The official record says it was an accident." She said, "The staff don't like to talk about it, but if you ask the right people, the ones who have been there long enough, they'll tell you that 217 does things with water. The tub fills itself. The mirrors show things. The bathroom door closes on its own." Caroline said, "Has anyone ever found out what really happened to her?" The colleague said, "The official record says it was an accident. The medical examiner's report from 1931 said it was an accident." She picked up her coffee. The problem is that whoever filled out that report spelled her name wrong. And the family who came to claim the body said they'd never been notified she was missing. Said they found out 3 weeks later from a newspaper clipping someone sent them. Which raises the question of who notified the medical examiner and who instructed him to call it an accident. She said nobody has ever answered those questions. Caroline checked out after the conference. She left a review on the booking site, 4 stars. Deducted 1 for bathroom issues. She has never stayed at the Belmont again. She told me the thing she can't stop thinking about is the reflection. Not the full tub, there are explanations for that, she's worked through most of them. But the reflection. The light fitting in the water, she said. It wasn't the light fitting in the room. It was something older, something from before the renovation. I was looking at a reflection of that bathroom as it had been in 1931. She said, I think she was showing me where she was, what the room looked like when it happened. She was quiet. I think she needed someone to see it. Open Book Chapter 2, The Last Room on the Left. The Pineview Motor Lodge is not a grand hotel. It is the opposite of the Belmont Grand, a 1960s roadside motel on a two-lane Vermont highway, 12 rooms in an L-shaped single-story block. A vacancy sign that flickered on the left side, an office with fluorescent lighting and a plastic plant on the counter, and a TV mounted high on the wall playing the local news on mute. $68 a night, cash preferred. Derek had been driving since early morning. He was a pharmaceutical sales representative covering the northern New England territory, which meant long days and longer roads and an intimate familiarity with the particular loneliness of motel rooms in rural states in winter. He had stayed in hundreds of rooms like this. He had no romantic illusions about them. They were a place to sleep, nothing more. He checked in at 9:30 p.m. The woman at the desk, 60s, efficient, with the manner of someone who had been running this particular operation for long enough that guests had ceased to be interesting, gave him room 12, the last room on the left at the far end of the L. He drove his car to the end of the lot, unloaded his overnight bag, and let himself in. Room 12 was standard issue in every respect. Queen bed, pressboard furniture, a television bolted to the dresser, a bathroom with a shower stall and a line of grout that someone had tried to clean and not quite managed. The window looked out on the parking lot and the tree line beyond it, pines, thick and dark, pressing close to the motel's perimeter in the way that forests in Vermont press close to everything, as if the trees have been here longer and consider the buildings to be a temporary condition they're waiting out. Derek brushed his teeth, plugged in his phone, turned on the television, and was asleep before 11. He woke at 1:15 a.m. to the sound of a door. The door to his room, the exterior door, the one he had locked and chain-latched before bed, the knob was rattling. Not the tentative rattle of someone who has made a mistake and gone to the wrong room. A steady, persistent rattling. Someone trying the knob, repeatedly. Derek sat up, he said, "Someone's at the wrong room." He reached for his phone. He said louder, "Hey, wrong room." The rattling stopped. He waited 30 seconds. Nothing. He lay back down. The rattling started again. He got up. He turned on the bedside lamp. He crossed to the door. He looked through the peephole. The parking lot was empty. His car, the overhead light on its pole, the tree line, nobody at the door, nobody anywhere in the frame of the peephole's fisheye view. He put his hand on the knob. Still warm, the warmth of a hand that had just released it. He waited with his hand on the knob, looking through the peephole at the empty parking lot for 3 full minutes. Nobody came back. He went back to bed. He did not sleep again. At 3 a.m., the television turned on. He had turned it off before sleep. He was certain of this. He always turned the TV off. The sound of it sleeping disturbed him. The television came on at 3 a.m. to a channel he had not been watching, a local public access channel showing, at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday night in March, old footage. Black and white footage. A place he recognized with a delayed, disorienting lurch of recognition, the Pineview Motor Lodge. Shot from the tree line, looking at the building, from an angle that no current camera could occupy, because the trees had been cleared back since whenever this footage was taken. The footage showed the motel at night. The old sign, different lettering, a different lamp on the vacancy sign, the L-shaped block of rooms, and at the far end of the L at the door of room 12. A man at the door, standing at the door of room 12, trying the knob. Derek said he watched for maybe 4 seconds before he hit the power button on the television remote. He sat in the resulting silence with his heart doing things he hadn't asked it to do and stared at the blank screen. In the morning, he asked the woman at the desk about the local public access channel. She looked at him with a flat expression and said the motel didn't have cable, only an antenna, and that the antenna got 3 channels out here and none of them were public access. He said, "What about room 12? Has anything ever happened in room 12? The flatness of her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not to fear, to a specific, practiced neutrality, the face of someone who has answered this question before and has decided how to answer it. She said, "People sometimes have trouble sleeping in 12. It's at the end of the block, the boilers on that side makes noise." Derek said, "Is there a history with that room?" A long pause, she looked at him. She said, "A man died in that room in 1987. He was a guest, traveling salesman. Heart attack in his sleep, that's what it was ruled." She looked back at her paperwork. She said, "They found him in the morning when he didn't check out." Derek said, "Did he have family, anyone to come for him?" She said, "A wife and 2 kids. He'd been on the road for 3 weeks, supposed to be home the next day." She picked up her pen. "The room's never been easy to keep rented since. People have trouble with it. Sounds, the TV coming on, the door." She said, very quietly, not looking up, "I think he's still trying to get home." Derek checked out without eating breakfast and drove south on Route 9 without stopping. He told me he thinks about the footage on the television. The man at the door of room 12, in old black and white, testing the knob, trying to get out. "He died in there in 1987, Derek said. "He was supposed to be home the next day, and whatever version of him is still in that room, he's still trying. 30 years later, still at the door, still trying to get home." He was quiet. "I think about that every time I'm on a long road trip, every time I'm in a motel room far from home. I think, go home when you can, don't wait, don't take one more booking, don't drive one more day." He paused. "Because some people run out of road before they get back." Open Book Chapter 3, The Ballroom Below. The Hargrove House is one of Savannah's finest hotels. It occupies a federal-style mansion built in 1847 that was converted to a boutique hotel in the 1990s, with the specific care of a restoration project that understood it was working with something sacred. Original plaster medallions on the ceilings. Original heart pine floors refinished so many times their surface has the depth of amber. A grand staircase that curves to the upper floors, with a balustrade that has been touched by more hands than can be counted. And on the ground floor behind the dining room, a ballroom. Not large by modern standards, the ballroom of a private mansion rather than a grand hotel, maybe 60 feet by 40, with a sprung hardwood floor and chandeliers that were gas-fitted originally, and now hold LED candle bulbs that the designer has dialed to the exact color temperature of real flame. The ballroom is available for private events. On evenings when it isn't booked, it is simply there, lit low, doors open. The music from the bar drifting in and mingling with the particular atmospheric silence of a room that was built to hold music and dancing, and still holds the echo of them. Yvonne and Philip were given room 6, directly above the ballroom, for their 35th anniversary. The first night was perfect. Dinner in the dining room, a bottle of Bordeaux they'd been saving for an occasion, a walk through Forsyth Park in the February dark with the fountain lit, and the Spanish moss moving above them in the warm Savannah night. They came back to the hotel and said goodnight to the desk clerk and climbed the grand staircase and went to room 6 and were asleep by 11:30. At 1:20 a.m., Yvonne woke up. She woke to music. Not loud, drifting. The kind of music that isn't quite identifiable when you're half asleep. You can hear that it's music, you can hear rhythm and melody, but the specific song doesn't resolve until you're fully awake. She lay still for a moment, blinking in the dark of room 6, and she listened, and the music resolved. A waltz. A full orchestra playing a waltz, rising through the floor from directly below her, from the ballroom below room 6, at 1:20 a.m. on a Thursday night in February. She nudged Philip. He was awake within seconds. He slept light, always had. She whispered, "Do you hear that?" He said, "Music." She said, "From downstairs." He said, "Is there an event?" They lay still and listened. The waltz was full and clear, not muffled the way music through a floor normally sounds, not the bass-heavy transmission of a sound system with the high frequencies absorbed by the building structure. Clear, orchestral, a waltz that Yvonne, who had played piano for 30 years, identified as Strauss. The Blue Danube played at a slightly slower tempo than the standard concert pace, the tempo she would think later of people actually dancing. Philip got up. He pulled on his robe and opened the room door and went to the hallway. The music was clearer in the hallway, coming from the staircase, coming from the ballroom. He went to the landing and looked down the staircase. The ballroom doors were open. The low lighting was on the chandeliers at their nighttime minimum, and the ballroom was full, not full of living people. Philip is specific about this, and he has been specific about it every time he has told this story, to every person he has told it to, including me. He did not see solid people dancing in the ballroom below him. What he saw was presence, movement. The visual quality of a room that is occupied. The way the light in a crowded room is different from the light in an empty one. The way the air moves differently. The way the space itself has a different density when it's full than when it's empty. The ballroom below him felt full. He could see, or perhaps sense, he couldn't say which was the more accurate description, couples. The movement of couples dancing. The swirl of formal clothes, the slow orbit of a waltz, the pattern of a dance floor in use. He could not resolve faces or specific figures. What he had was the impression of many people in formal dress, dancing a waltz at 1:20 a.m. in a ballroom that was booked for no event, in a hotel that was otherwise asleep. He stood on the landing for 4 minutes. The waltz ended, a moment of silence. Then another piece began, something slower, something in three-quarter time, something Yvonne would later say sounded like it belonged to the 1890s rather than the 1950s or 60s. An older waltz, something that predated recording. Philip went back to room 6. He described what he'd seen to Yvonne. She got up, she put on her robe, she went to the landing. The music was still playing. She looked down at the ballroom. She saw what Philip had seen, the quality of a full room, the movement, the feeling of formal occasion. She is a pianist, a person whose relationship with music is more analytical than most. She stood on the landing and listened to the waltz, and she said, quietly, to nobody in particular, "You play beautifully." The music paused. Just for a moment, a bar's rest, as if the orchestra had heard her. Then it resumed. They went back to bed. The music continued for another 40 minutes by Philip's watch and then stopped. They slept. In the morning at breakfast, they asked the desk clerk about events the previous evening. She confirmed, no events were booked. The ballroom had been empty. She looked at them with the expression they had come to recognize. The careful, practiced expression of a hotel employee whose property has a history they are expected to neither confirm nor deny. Yvonne said, "The Hargrove family, they held balls here." The clerk said, "The Hargroves built this house in 1847, yes. They were well known for their social events. They held balls here every season until the Civil War." Yvonne said, "And after the war?" A pause. The family didn't recover as well as some. The balls were less frequent. The last one recorded was in 1893. Philip said, "What happened in 1893? The clerk said, "A guest died during the ball. A young man, a friend of the family, he collapsed on the dance floor. Heart, they believe, he was 23. She looked at her desk. The Hargroves never hosted another ball after that. Yvonne and Philip sat with this over their eggs and their coffee and the Savannah morning coming in through the dining room windows. Then Yvonne said, "I told them they played beautifully. Do you think they heard me?" Philip said, "They paused." She said, "They paused." He said, "I think they heard you." She looked at her coffee. She said, 130 years. playing the same waltzes in the same ballroom in the same house, waiting for someone to notice. She looked up at him. I'm glad we heard them. Open Book Chapter 4, The Room That Wasn't There. Nadia is a careful person. She is careful in the specific way of scientists. She does not make claims she cannot support. She distinguishes between observation and interpretation. She is suspicious of her own perceptions when they conflict with what she knows to be physically possible. She spent 4 years completing a doctorate in materials science and another 2 in a postdoc position that required her to produce results that were reproducible and verifiable. She is, by both training and temperament, a skeptic. She is also the person who experienced the most structurally impossible thing in this entire compilation. The Caldwell Arms is a 4-star hotel in Edinburgh's Old Town, occupying a building that began as a coaching inn in the late 18th century and was expanded in stages through the Victorian period. It is a labyrinthine place, the kind of building that has been added to and modified so many times over 200 years that its internal logic is non-Euclidean, corridors turning where they shouldn't, staircases appearing in unexpected locations, rooms that can be reached 2 different ways on the same floor. Nadia was there for a conference. She was given room 34 on the 3rd floor. She found it without difficulty, checked in, attended the conference for 2 days without incident. On the 2nd night, returning from a conference dinner, she took what she believed to be the correct corridor to room 34 and found a door she had not seen before. She was on the right floor. She was certain of this. She had taken the stairs to the 3rd floor. She had the correct key card in her hand. She was moving down the correct corridor. But the door to room 34, which she had passed twice a day for 2 days and which she knew by its specific position, 5 doors from the stairwell on the right side, was not where it should be. In its place was a door that was not the same door. The same number, 34, but different. The door was older. The wood was different, the hardware was different, the gap at the bottom was different. It was, as Nadia would spend the next several days trying to explain, not the door she had been using for 2 days, despite bearing the same number and being in the same location. She stood in the corridor for a moment. She tried to rationalize. She had drunk wine at dinner. She was tired. She had perhaps miscounted the doors from the stairwell. She tried the room on either side. Both responded normally to neighboring key cards by the sound she could hear. She tried her key card on the unfamiliar door. It worked. The room was wrong. Not redesigned, not differently furnished. Wrong in a more fundamental way, the way a room is wrong when its dimensions don't match what you know to be true. Room 34, her room 34, the one she had slept in for 2 nights, was a standard double room with a window overlooking the clothes below. Rectangular, approximately 15 feet by 20. Bathroom in the near right corner, wardrobe on the left wall, window on the far wall. This room was not rectangular. It was irregular. The walls meeting at angles that suggested the room occupied a different footprint than any room of this floor plan should. The window was in the wrong wall, looking out at something that was not the clothes she had looked down at for 2 nights. It looked out at a courtyard, a cobbled courtyard she had not seen from any window or entrance during 2 days in the building. The furniture was different, older, not hotel furniture, the furniture of a room that was used as a room rather than a hospitality product. A proper wardrobe, not a flat pack. A writing desk with a chair that had been sat in enough to wear the arms. A bed frame that was cast iron and real. Nadia stood in the doorway. She is a materials scientist. Her first instinct was to document. She took her phone out and photographed the room, the angled walls, the window in the wrong wall, the courtyard below, the cast iron bed frame, all of it. She stepped inside. The room smelled different. Old paper, pipe smoke, the cold, specific residue of pipe tobacco in a room where it has been smoked for decades. Not the fresh smell of a recent smoker, but the deeply embedded exhalation of a room that absorbed it over years and still holds it in the plaster. A lamp on the writing desk was lit, a lamp she had not turned on, a lamp that was not electric. It burned with the specific color and quality of oil, throwing warm and slightly wavering light over the desk. On the desk, papers, handwritten, ink on laid paper. She crossed to the desk and looked at them. They were written in a handwriting she could not read quickly, ornate Victorian, the particular copperplate style of a person who had been trained to write in an earlier century. She could make out some words. The top page appeared to be a letter in progress. She could read the salutation, "My dearest Margaret," and the date at the top of the page, October 14, 1887. Nadia took a photograph of the letter. Then the lamp went out. Complete darkness, not the gradual dimming of an oil lamp running low, instantaneous. She stood in the sudden dark in the wrong room with her phone screen as the only light, and she felt something she said she had not felt since she was a child and was absolutely not supposed to be feeling as an adult scientist in a hotel room in Edinburgh. She felt that the room knew she was there, and that it had tolerated her presence long enough, and that her time in it was over. She backed out of the door. The door closed behind her. She stood in the corridor. She looked at the door, room 34, the same number. The door was her door, the normal door, the hotel door, the wood and hardware she had used for 2 days. She tried her key card, the green light. She went in. Her room exactly as she had left it, window overlooking the close, rectangular hotel furniture, her open suitcase on the luggage stand, her conference materials on the desk, everything as it should be. She checked the photographs on her phone. The photographs she had taken in the wrong room were there. The angled walls, the window over the courtyard, the cast iron bed frame, the lamp. The letter was blurred. She had moved slightly when taking it, but the date was legible. October 14, 1887. She told me she spent 3 months trying to find a rational explanation. She approached it as she approached any research problem, systematically, exhaustively, following every lead. She found the building's original floor plans in the Edinburgh Architectural Archives, the coaching inn as it was built in 1786, and the Victorian additions added in stages from 1840 to 1895. She found the floor plan of the 3rd floor as it existed in the 1880s, before the last major renovation, before the expansion that changed the building's footprint. In 1887, the room in the position where she had found the wrong room was not room 34. It was a private sitting room, occupied by the inn's longest-term resident, a man who had been living at the Caldwell Arms since 1871. He had died there in 1889. His name in the records was George W. Caldwell, a relation of the founding family, an academic, a man described in the few contemporary accounts Nadia could find as a scholar of considerable reputation who had lived very quietly and written prodigiously, and had left behind at his death a room reportedly stacked floor to ceiling with correspondence. She found one more thing. In a digitized collection of Victorian correspondence held by the National Library of Scotland, donated by a family in the early 20th century, a collection labeled with a donor name that matched a Margaret, the name on the letter Nadia had partially read. She found a single letter to the collection that had come from the Caldwell Arms Hotel. From George W. Caldwell, dated October 14, 1887. The letter was only 2 pages, and she was able to read it in the archive's digital viewer. It was a love letter, quiet, reserved, the language of a Victorian scholar trying to express feeling through the only medium he fully commanded. He told Margaret he thought of her often. He told her he hoped she was well. He told her he was still at the Caldwell Arms, still in his rooms, still at his desk. He said, "I have been here so long, I confess, I am not sure I would know how to be elsewhere." Nadia read that line 3 times. Then she sat in the archive reading room in Edinburgh and thought about a man who had lived in one room in one building for 18 years and who had been, in some essential way, still there more than 100 years after his death, still at his desk, still writing to Margaret. She said he told her he didn't know how to be elsewhere. I think he meant it more than he knew. She never submitted her account publicly. She submitted it to me specifically because she wanted it on record somewhere that the photographs exist, that she took photographs in a room that cannot exist on the 3rd floor of the Caldwell Arms in its current footprint. She said, "I'm a scientist. I cannot explain what I walked into. I cannot explain the photographs. I cannot explain what I smelled or saw or felt." She paused. "But I can tell you that October 14, 1887, the date on that letter is not a date I knew before I walked into that room, and it is a real date on a real letter in the National Library of Scotland." She looked at me with the direct, steady eyes of a person who has made peace with not having an answer. I don't know how to be a scientist and believe what I experienced. I also don't know how to have experienced it and not believe it. She stopped. "I suppose George and I have something in common." Open Book Chapter 5, What They Left in the Basement. Arthur was there professionally. He was researching a feature for a travel magazine on the trend of dark tourism hospitality, the conversion of historically significant or unsettling properties into luxury accommodations. The Whitmore was a flagship example, a state psychiatric facility that had operated from 1931 to 1994, housed at its peak over 800 patients, and that a developer had purchased in 2008 and spent $47 million converting into a 60-room boutique hotel. The conversion had kept the original limestone exterior intact, retained many of the original interior architectural elements, the vaulted common room ceilings, the wide institutional corridors, the original terrazzo floors, while installing everything a luxury hotel required. The hotel marketed itself as History Restored. The website's history section was carefully curated. It mentioned the building's significant past as a center for mental health care and spoke of the many lives spent within its walls during a transformative era in American medicine. It did not describe the specific treatments administered in that era. It did not describe the conditions in which patients lived. It did not describe what had been found in the basement during the renovation, a detail Arthur had turned up in his research and which the hotel, to date, had declined to comment on publicly. He was given room 47 in the East Wing, one of the original patient ward corridors, the hotel's most authentic rooms, marketed specifically for guests who wanted the full atmospheric experience. He checked in on a Friday afternoon, toured the property, conducted an interview with the hotel's director of guest experience, ate a genuinely excellent dinner in what had been the patient's dining hall, and retired to room 47 with his laptop and his notes and the professional detachment of a journalist who had covered difficult subjects before and was not easily unsettled. The room was striking. High ceiling, the original 12-foot institutional height, narrow window with original iron hardware, the glass itself original, with the wavy imperfections of old glass that made the Hudson Valley landscape beyond it look slightly underwater. The bed was a king with 700 thread-count linens. The bathroom had been carved out of what had been a patient examination room. Every detail of the renovation was impeccable. Arthur worked until midnight and went to sleep. He woke at 3:33 a.m. Not to sound, to silence. The specific quality of a silence that has recently replaced sound, the acoustic negative of something that was happening and has just stopped. He lay still for a moment, orienting, and he became aware of two things simultaneously. His room door was open. He had locked it. The chain was on. The chain was still engaged, but the door was open as far as the chain allowed, an inch and a half of corridor visible beyond it. The the corridor lighting showing the terrazzo floor outside. And from somewhere below him, from the basement level, through the floor, something was happening. Not a sound he could immediately classify. He lay still and he listened and he worked to classify it. It was rhythmic, slow, occurring at intervals of about 4 seconds. It was, and he came to this conclusion reluctantly, because he did not want it to be this, because this was the thing that would require him to get out of bed. It was vocal. Someone was speaking in the basement. Arthur is a journalist. He got out of bed. He put on his shoes and his robe and he opened the chain-latched door as wide as it would go and looked out at the empty corridor. He unlatched the chain and stepped out. The corridor was long 30 feet of original institutional hallway, the terrazzo floor, the vaulted ceiling, the numbered doors, all closed, all presumably containing sleeping guests. He found the basement stairs at the end of the corridor, a door marked staff only that, when he pushed it, opened onto a concrete staircase descending 1 level. No lights had been installed on the staircase. He used his phone. He descended. The basement of the Whitmore had not been incorporated into the hotel renovation. This was the detail Arthur had found in his research that the hotel had not publicized. The renovation plans, available through the county building permit records, showed that the basement level, which in the hospital's operational years had housed the hydrotherapy facilities, the ECT treatment rooms, and the isolation ward, had been sealed. Not renovated, not incorporated. The hotel's website made no mention of a basement. The tour he'd been given that afternoon had not included it. The door at the bottom of the staircase was a fire door, heavy, steel-framed. It should have been locked. It was open, not ajar, standing open, held by its own weight against the frame into the darkness of the basement beyond. Arthur has described what he found at the bottom of those stairs to 3 people in total, including me. He describes it carefully, specifically, with the discipline of a journalist who knows the difference between what he observed and what he felt, and who is committed to keeping those things separate even when they are very difficult to separate. What he observed: a long corridor, original tile, white, institutional, intact in most places, missing in some, the gaps showing the concrete beneath. Doors on both sides heavy with the specific hardware of facility doors, the kind with small windows reinforced with wire mesh. Most closed, 2 open. From the open door on the left, approximately 15 feet in, the sound was coming. A voice, male, speaking slowly in a cadence that Arthur eventually identified as recitation, something spoken from memory, repeated, the rhythm of a phrase said so many times it had become automatic. He could not make out the words. He stood at the entrance to the corridor and he listened, and the voice recited its silent repetition, and he could not make out a single word. He could feel, and this is where the journalist and the human being part ways. This is where he acknowledges the limit of observable fact. He could feel, standing at the entrance to that corridor with his phone's light cutting into the dark, the weight of the place. The specific weight of a building that held 63 years of institutional suffering, 800 patients, the treatments of an era that medicine has since repudiated. 63 years of people in these rooms, behind these wire mesh windows, speaking to nobody. Or perhaps being spoken to. He took 2 steps into the corridor. The voice stopped. The silence that followed was not the silence of someone stopping because they'd heard him. It was the silence of a held breath, the silence of attention. Arthur said into the dark, "I hear you." He said, "I don't know who you were, but I hear you." The basement was silent. He stood there for 3 minutes. Then he turned around, climbed the stairs, went back to room 47, and sat on the edge of the king bed with his journalist's notebook and his journalist's pen, and wrote down everything he had experienced in the specific, factual language of a person who has been trained to capture moments accurately. He filed his travel feature 3 weeks later. The piece was warm, beautifully written, appropriately critical of the ethics of dark tourism hospitality, and mentioned none of what had happened in the basement. He told me my editor would not have run it, and more than that, I wasn't sure I had the right. Whatever is down there in those rooms behind those doors, those were people, patients, people who were put in that place and had things done to them that we now call abuses and that were then called treatment. Whatever of them is still there. He stopped. They're not a story. They're not a feature. They're not content. They're people who deserved better than they got when they were alive, and they deserve better than being turned into a luxury hotel amenity when they're dead. He said, I told the hotel I'd heard sounds in the basement. They said the building had significant HVAC equipment that could produce a range of auditory effects. He smiled without humor. They said that in an email, a range of auditory effects, like they'd thought about how to phrase that. He said, whatever is in that basement is not HVAC equipment. He looked at his notebook, and whatever it was saying all those years to all that empty dark, I hope at least once it felt heard. Open book chapter 6, The Guest in 8. Susan has a rule about hotels. If the room feels wrong within the first 5 minutes, you trust that feeling and you ask for a different room. You don't rationalize. You don't argue with yourself about sunk costs or inconvenience. You go to the desk and you ask politely for a room change, and you do not explain why. This is a rule she developed over 40 years of traveling with Tom, who is the kind of man who can sleep anywhere and therefore has no useful instincts about rooms. She broke her own rule at the Marigold Inn. She has thought about why many times since, and the best explanation she has is this. The room didn't feel wrong at first. It felt right. It felt like exactly what a Maine coastal inn should feel: whitewashed walls, nautical prints, a window overlooking the harbor, the smell of salt and old wood, and the particular clarity of a room that has been cleaned by someone who takes pride in it. She set her bag down and breathed and felt the specific exhale of arrival in a place that fits you. The room felt right. That was the problem. Room 8 was on the second floor, at the end of the hall, with a window that gave the best harbor view in the building. The inn had been operating since 1887, a sea captain's house converted to a boarding house, and then gradually to a proper inn, each generation of owners adding amenities while preserving the building's essential character. The current owners, a couple from Portland who had bought it in 2012, had renovated with restraint. Room 8 was their best room. It was almost always booked. Susan and Tom spent a pleasant day, the harbor, lunch, a long walk up the coast road, dinner at a fish shack the concierge recommended. They came back to the inn at 9, had a nightcap on the porch, and went up to room 8 at 10:30. The room was exactly as they'd left it. Tom fell asleep within 10 minutes. Susan read for a while and was asleep by 11. She woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of someone sitting in the chair. There was a chair in room 8, a Windsor chair by the window, old, original to the house, painted white so many times the detail and the spindles had been filled and rounded by the layers. It was a decorative chair more than a functional one, positioned to look at the harbor from the window. Susan had sat in it briefly that afternoon and found it not particularly comfortable. Someone was sitting in it now. She could hear it, the specific sound of weight in an old wooden chair, the faint protest of the joints, the barely perceptible creak of a person settling. She lay still with her eyes open in the dark, and she listened to the sound of someone sitting in the chair by the window. Tom was asleep beside her. The sound was not Tom. She said, "Hello." The chair was quiet. She said, "I know you're there." The chair made a sound, not the settling sound. A different sound. The sound of someone leaning forward in a chair, shifting their weight toward the front of the seat, toward the window, as if they'd heard her and turned their attention to the harbor. She sat up in bed. By the harbor light coming through the curtainless window, the Marigold Inn had views good enough that they didn't need curtains. The guests were told she could see the chair. A shape in the chair. Not defined, Not a solid person with a face and clothes and presence in the normal sense. A shape, a human-shaped darkness, denser than the surrounding dark, in the chair by the window, sitting very still looking at the harbor. Susan said, "Is this your room?" The shape did not move. She said, "We won't be here long, just a few days. You can have it back." A pause. Then the shape, and this is what Susan has told every person who has heard this story, said it to my face with the steady directness of a woman in her late 60s who has earned the right to say exactly what she experienced. The shape nodded. A single, slow nod. The acknowledgement of a person who has heard what you said and accepted it. Then it was gone. Not movement, not departure. Simply no longer there between one moment and the next. The chair was empty. Susan lay back down. She thought for a while, then she slept. In the morning she told Tom, who is the most patient listener she knows. He said, "Did it bother you?" She said no, it was sad. It was a sad shape, whatever it was, not dangerous, just sad. He said, "Sad about what?" She said, "I think it was sad about the harbor. About not being able to see it anymore the way it used to." Pause. She asked the innkeeper over breakfast about the history of Room 8. The innkeeper, a candid woman who had grown up on the coast and had the directness of people who spend their lives watching the ocean, said Room 8 had been the captain's room. The original captain, the man who built the house in 1871. Captain Alden Marsh, a commercial fisherman who had spent 40 years on the Maine coast and who had, in his retirement, sat in the chair by the window of that room for hours every day, watching the harbor. He had died in the room in 1903. In the chair. Susan said, "Does he still come back?" The innkeeper said, "Some guests have mentioned it, not many. Most people aren't awake at that hour or they don't notice." She topped up Susan's coffee. She said, "He was a man who loved this harbor his whole life. I imagine dying didn't change that much." Susan told me the thing that stayed with her was what she'd said to the shape, "You can have it back," and the nod, the acknowledgement. She said all he wanted was what he'd always had, his chair, his window, the harbor at night. She paused. "We were using his room, his chair, his view, and I told him we'd give it back when we left, and he nodded, like that was all he needed to hear." She looked at the table. "I always tip extra when I check out of hotels now, and I always say out loud to the room before I leave, 'We're done now. Thank you. This is yours again.'" She paused. "It costs nothing, and if someone is still in that room, if there's a Captain Marsh in every hotel room I've ever stayed in, then at least they know I knew they were there. At least they know they weren't invisible." Open Book Chapter 7, The Ryokan on the Mountain. The Kiyomizu Ryokan has been welcoming guests since 1887. It sits on a forested hillside above the town of Nikko, in a valley in the mountains of Tochigi Prefecture north of Tokyo. A traditional Japanese inn built on a property that the current owner's family has occupied for more than 2 centuries. The building itself is old cedar and shoji, the rooms floored in tatami, the communal baths fed by a mountain spring that comes out of the hillside at a constant 42 degrees. The breakfasts are kaiseki, the dinners are kaiseki, the sake is made in the prefecture, and the plum wine is made in the garden. James and Ellie booked it for their honeymoon because Ellie had read about it in a travel essay and had decided, with the quiet certainty she brought to most decisions, that it was exactly the right place. She was right about most things. She was right about the ryokan. They were given a room called the Cedar Room, a ground floor room with a private garden, a sliding screen door that opened onto the garden, a mountain view from the garden's far edge. The room was small and perfect in the way of Japanese traditional spaces. No unnecessary element, every element essential, the simplicity generating a quality of peace that was almost architectural. They arrived in the afternoon, bathed in the spring-fed baths, had dinner in the dining room, and walked in the garden in the October evening with the mountain dark above them, and the cedar trees very old and very still. They were happy in the easy, uncomplicated way of people who are exactly where they want to be. They went asleep on the futon, on the tatami floor at 11. Ellie woke at 3 a.m. She woke to light. Not the overhead light, it was off. Not James's phone, he slept with it face down. A light from the garden side of the room, through the shoji screen, soft and diffuse. The kind of light that is not quite identifiable as a single source, as if the garden itself were faintly luminous. She lay still and watched the light through the shoji. And in the light, in the translucent paper of the shoji screen, which was thin enough to show silhouettes from the garden side, she saw a figure. Standing in the garden on the other side of the screen, a woman by the silhouette, slender in clothing with a particular drape that Ellie would later identify when she looked at historical photographs as a furisode, a formal kimono, the long-sleeved style, standing very still, facing the screen. Facing Ellie. Ellie lay still. The figure did not move. After a long moment, Ellie sat up carefully, so as not to wake James, and she looked at the figure through the shoji. She said, very quietly, not wanting to wake James, not wanting to shatter whatever was happening, she said, "Konbanwa." Good evening. The figure moved. Not toward the screen, not away. A movement that Ellie described as a bow, a slow, deliberate inclination of the torso, the formal bow of Japanese courtesy. Responding to her greeting, Ellie bowed back from her position on the futon. She felt she should. It seemed the only word she found for it correct. The figure straightened. The light in the garden dimmed slowly, over about 30 seconds until the garden was dark again. The figure was gone. In the morning, Ellie asked the innkeeper's wife, a woman who had been at the ryokan for 40 years, the wife of the third-generation owner, about the history of the cedar room. She did so carefully. Her Japanese was limited. The innkeeper's wife's English was also limited. Between them, with patience and a translation app on Ellie's phone, the story emerged. The cedar room had been the room of the innkeeper's wife's grandmother. The grandmother had been born in the ryokan and had lived her entire life there. She had been the innkeeper's wife, searched for the word traditional, very traditional. She had maintained the old customs, the old dress, the old forms of courtesy, long after they had been abandoned elsewhere. She had died in the cedar room in 1971. Ellie asked if guests had ever reported seeing her. The innkeeper's wife was quiet for a moment. Then she said in careful English, "Some guests see a woman in the garden in very old clothes. Usually they are frightened." Ellie said, "I wasn't frightened, I bowed to her." The innkeeper's wife looked at her for a long time. Then she said, and her voice had something in it that Ellie could not precisely identify, not surprise, not disbelief, something closer to relief. She bowed back. Ellie said, "Yes." The innkeeper's wife was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Most people do not bow. They turn on the light, they slide the screen, they look in the garden. Nothing there." She paused. "She doesn't like to be looked at, but she likes politeness." She looked at her hands. She always liked politeness. James told me he'd slept through the whole thing and was mildly indignant about it. He said Ellie had described it to him over breakfast with the composure of someone who had made peace with something extraordinary and was simply reporting it. He said, "She told me a woman who'd been dead since 1971 bowed to her in the garden, and Ellie's response was to bow back, because she said that was the right thing to do." He paused. "That is the most Ellie thing I have ever heard of. Of course she bowed back. Of course she would." He said, "The innkeeper's wife told us that the grandmother always used the cedar room for the guests she liked the best, the ones she thought deserved the best room." He smiled. "I think we got the right room." Open Book Chapter 8, The Mirror Across the Hall. Marcus booked the Pemberton because it was on his company's approved vendor list, and it was close to the client's offices and the rate was reasonable. He had no particular feelings about it either way. He arrived on a Sunday evening, checked in, ordered room service, watched basketball, and went to sleep. He was in room 311. He woke at 2:10 a.m. for no reason he could identify. He is not normally a light sleeper. Nothing had disturbed him. He was simply awake all at once, fully. He checked his phone. He got up to use the bathroom. He came back to bed and was about to lie down when he looked at the corridor through the gap under the room door. A hotel corridor at 2 a.m., seen through the inch of light under a closed door, is unremarkable in every detail. The bottom of the door opposite, the terrazzo floor, the edge of the baseboard. You notice nothing because there is nothing to notice. Marcus noticed something. Feet. A pair of feet, visible under the door of the room directly across the hall, room 310. Standing at the door of room 310, not moving, just standing. Marcus crouched and looked through the gap. He could see the feet clearly, a person, standing at the inside of the door of room 310 with their feet right at the door's base as if they'd been standing there for a while. He looked at the feet. He thought, housekeeping doesn't work at 2 a.m. He thought, another guest checking if they had an alert on the door. He thought, none of these explanations account for a person standing motionless at the inside of a hotel room door at 2 a.m. He stood up. He went to his door. He looked through the peephole. The corridor was empty. The door to room 310 was closed. Nobody in the corridor. Nobody standing anywhere visible through the fisheye of the peephole. He crouched again and looked under the door. The feet were there. He did this 3 times. Through the peephole, nothing. Under the door, feet unmoving at the base of room 310's door. He took out his phone and photographed the gap. He has the photograph. He showed it to me. There is a section of dark under room 310's door that could be feet, could be a shadow, is not definitively one or the other. He knows what he saw. The photograph is inconclusive. He went back to bed. He lay awake for a while thinking about the feet. He got up one more time at about 3 a.m. and looked through the peephole. Nobody in the corridor. He crouched and looked under the door. The feet were still there. But there was something else. The gap under the door of room 310, the narrow strip of light from the corridor showing under the bottom of the door, was partially blocked by the feet, which were not moving, which were not making any sound, which continued to stand at the inside of the door at 3 a.m. for no reason Marcus could explain. And on the floor of the corridor, just on the other side of the door from those feet, he could see it clearly in the light from the corridor, plainly. In the strip of floor the gap revealed there was a shadow. Not the shadow of the feet. The shadow of the feet was straight, proportional, cast by the corridor light from directly above. This shadow was angled, cast as if by a different light source, from a different angle, a light source that was not in the corridor at all. The shadow of something standing between the feet, and a light that didn't exist. Marcus checked out in the morning. Before he left, he stopped at the front desk and asked, matter-of-factly and without drama, about room 310. The desk clerk, a young woman who began to type something into her computer and then stopped, looked up at him and said, "Is there something I can help you with regarding that room?" Marcus said, "Who's in it?" The clerk said, "Room 310 is not currently occupied." Marcus said, "Last night." The clerk checked her screen. Room 310 has been offline since February. It's undergoing maintenance. Marcus said, "What kind of maintenance?" The clerk said very professionally, "Interior work. We're redoing the flooring." She looked at her screen. She said without looking up, "Is there anything else I can help you with?" Marcus walked out of the Pemberton with his roller bag and his laptop case and his company's approved vendor list and got in his lift to the airport and stared out the window at New Orleans going by and thought about a pair of feet standing motionless at the inside of a hotel room door at 3 a.m. in a room that was offline, that was undergoing maintenance, that had no guest in it, and had had no guest in it since February. He told me, "I'm not going to tell you what I think it was. I've thought about it. I have a theory, but theories are just stories we tell ourselves when we can't handle not knowing." He paused. "What I'll say is this: those feet were just standing there, not packing, not moving toward the door, just standing, right at the inside of the door, not going anywhere, not doing anything." He looked out the window. Just standing inside a room they couldn't leave. Open Book Chapter 9, The Photograph. Trevithick House is a Victorian manor on the Cornish coast, perched on a cliff above a sea that is greenish-black in winter and the specific deep blue of old glass in summer. It was built in 1878 by a mining magnate who never lived in it. He died the year it was completed and left it to a family that occupied it for 3 generations before the last of the line converted it to a hotel in 1987. It has 12 rooms. It has been fully booked most summers since 2015, when it appeared on a list of the most romantic small hotels in England, and has not fallen off it since. Sam and Rachel had booked it 9 months in advance. They had the corner room, room 4, the largest in the house, with windows on 2 sides and a 4-poster bed the hotel claimed was original to the house's construction, which would make it over 140 years old. Rachel told me it was the most beautiful room she had ever been in. She is not a person who says that lightly. 4 days. Coastal walks, cream teas, dinners by the window with the sea going dark below them, mornings in bed in the extraordinary 4-poster with the June light coming in and nothing requiring their presence anywhere in the world. Perfect. Rachel's word and Sam's. They used it independently in the same tone, the tone of people who have had a perfect thing and are still trying to believe it actually happened to them. Sam used a film camera on the trip. He'd bought a second-hand one before the wedding, a decision he now describes as one of the best he's ever made. The discipline of limited frames, the quality of light, the particular warmth that analog photography produces. He took a roll and a half at Trevithick House. Mostly Rachel, the landscape, the room. He had the film developed when they got home. He collected the prints and sat at the kitchen table and went through them with the excitement of someone who has been waiting 2 weeks to see how shots turned out. Rachel beside him, a cup of tea each, the summer evening through the kitchen window. He went through them one by one. The Cornish coast, the harbor, Rachel on the cliff path, the hotel from the garden, Rachel at the window, the 4-poster bed made morning light. Then, a photograph he did not remember taking. It was taken from the foot of the 4-poster bed, looking up toward the headboard. In the photograph, Sam and Rachel were both asleep, Rachel on the left side, Sam on the right, the way they always slept, both of them clearly and peacefully asleep. The 4-poster canopy above them. The room in the background, dark, June light barely suggesting itself through the heavy curtains. Sam did not remember taking this photograph. He did not remember waking in the night. He did not remember picking up the camera. He did not remember any moment during those 4 nights in which he had been out of bed with the camera in his hand. He showed it to Rachel. She looked at it for a long time. She said, "Sam, we're both asleep." He said, "I know." She said, "Who took this photograph?" He has no answer. He has turned the question over and over in the 4 years since and has no answer. The camera had not been left in a position from which an accidental self-timer shot could have produced this framing. The angle and distance were only achievable from the foot of the bed, standing, looking toward the head, holding the camera. The timestamp on the negative film doesn't have a timestamp, but his notes from the trip allowed him to reconstruct the sequence based on what was shot when placed the photograph at some time in the 2nd or 3rd night of their stay. He was asleep. Rachel was asleep. Someone took a photograph of them sleeping. Rachel told me the first response was the rational one. They turned the photograph over looking for any explanation. A timer function on the camera they hadn't set. A reflection from something. A second camera. Nothing held up. The second response was the one they lived in for about a week: fear. The photograph was proof that someone had been in the room. A person, physical access. She called the hotel. The hotel was appalled, launched an internal investigation, reviewed their key card access logs, interviewed staff. Everything was clean. No unauthorized access. No evidence of any person entering the room other than themselves and housekeeping during the day. The third response, the one they have settled into, uneasily, over 4 years, was the one that Rachel described to me. She said, "We had a perfect stay, 4 days. Nothing wrong, nothing frightening, nothing that made either of us feel unsafe or watched or uncomfortable. The room felt," she paused, "like someone loved it. Like someone was very happy we were there, happy we were treating it well, happy we were happy in it." She said, "When I look at that photograph, when I could still look at it before we put it away, what I see is 2 people asleep and at peace in a very beautiful room. That's what the photograph shows." She said, "I think whoever is in Trevithick House, whoever has been there since the Victorian era, watching over that corner room with its 4-poster bed, and its 2 windows and its extraordinary view, I think they saw us there and they wanted a record of it. Of 2 people being happy in their room. Of love in the space they've been occupying for 140 years. She was quiet. "That's what I think. I know it sounds like something you tell yourself to feel better. Maybe it is." She looked at me. "But if someone has been alone in that room for 140 years, and they finally had 4 days of a young couple on their honeymoon, happy, genuinely happy, filling the room with the thing it was built for, maybe they just wanted to remember it." She said, "Maybe they just wanted to keep it." The photograph is in a sealed envelope in the bottom drawer of their desk. Rachel told me they've agreed they'll open it someday, when they're older, when they've been together long enough that the mystery of it has become more precious than frightening. She said, "It's a photograph of us asleep and happy on our honeymoon. Whatever took it, whatever stood at the foot of that bed in the dark, it was looking at something worth keeping." She smiled. "That's how I choose to see it. 2 people happy in an old house, and something ancient watching over them." Open Book Chapter 10, Do Not Disturb. This is the last account. I saved it for last not because it is the most dramatic. It is not the most dramatic, but because it is the most quietly devastating, and because what Diane Croft experienced at the Excelsior Palace in December of last year is the one account in this entire compilation that has not resolved. Not even partially. The Excelsior Palace opened in 1907. It is a landmark, 17 stories of Edwardian architecture on a hill above Union Square, the kind of hotel that has hosted everyone from heads of state to honeymooners, to traveling salesmen to people who needed a place to disappear for a week. Its most famous amenity is its view. Its rooms on the upper floors look out over the city and the bay, and on clear days, Marin County across the water. Diane was in room 1408. This is not a joke and not a reference. She was assigned room 1408 on the 14th floor, a standard king room with a bay view, because it was the room available in her preferred category on the nights she'd booked. She did not know about the room's history when she checked in. She does now. Diane was in San Francisco on personal business, the handling of her mother's estate, a 4-day visit that was emotionally exhausting and logistically overwhelming, and that she had been dreading for months. She was alone. She had come alone on purpose. She needed to think, needed space, needed to not be performing okayness for anyone who knew her. She was 55 years old and her mother had just died, and she was in a hotel room for 4 days, and she intended to cry as much as she needed to and not be apologetic about it. She cried a great deal on the first night. She was crying quite openly, sitting on the bed with her laptop and a glass of wine and her mother's estate documents spread around her, when she noticed the Do Not Disturb sign. The sign was on the inside of the door. She had placed it on the outside when she checked in standard procedure for a guest who did not want to be interrupted. It was a card on a loop, placed over the door handle. She had placed it on the outside handle. It was now on the inside handle. She looked at it. She got up and crossed the room and looked at it more carefully. It was her sign, the Excelsior Palace card, white with gold lettering, the loop over the interior handle, exactly as you'd place it if you were inside the room and wanted privacy from within. She had not moved it. She had not been near the door. She put it back on the outside. She went back to the bed. She picked up her wine. She looked at the door. The sign was on the inside handle. She moved it outside 3 more times over the following 20 minutes. Each time she turned away, it returned to the inside. Not immediately, she would look away, look back, and the sign would have moved. She never caught the motion, just the result. She stood in the middle of room 1408 and said to the room, "Okay, what do you want?" The room was quiet. She said, "I've been crying for 2 hours. If you're here, you know that. Whatever you are, you know I'm having a terrible time." She sat back down on the bed. She said, "I don't have anything left tonight. I'm sorry. I don't have anything left." The room's temperature shifted. She felt it, not dramatically, not a sudden cold, but the air in the room became slightly warmer. The specific warmth of proximity, of something very close. And the room, this is the part of Diane's account that I have thought about every day since she told me. The room was quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet than it had been before. Not the quiet of an empty room, which is a particular and recognizable absence. The quiet of a room with someone in it who is simply not speaking. The companionable quiet of being with a person who doesn't require you to fill the silence. She sat with it. She didn't speak. She didn't ask questions. She didn't try to understand what was there or what it wanted. She just sat on the bed in room 1408 in the Excelsior Palace on a December night in San Francisco with the bay view dark behind her, and the estate documents spread around her, and her mother 3 weeks dead, and she sat in the company of whatever was in that room. For 45 minutes. Then she said, "Thank you." She got up, she brushed her teeth, she turned off the lights, she got into bed. She slept. In the morning, she researched the room. Room 1408 of the Excelsior Palace had, she found without great difficulty, a history. Multiple reported incidents across multiple decades, unexplained sounds, objects moved, guests requesting room changes in the night. She found a single piece of deeper history in an archive of San Francisco Chronicle digitized editions. In March of 1952, a guest had died in room 1408, a woman. She had been alone on personal business and had died in her sleep. The medical examiner had listed her as having died of natural causes, heart failure, while in a state that the report described with clinical detachment as consistent with acute emotional distress. She had died alone in that room, in a state of acute emotional distress. And 71 years later, in that same room, a woman alone and in distress had sat on the bed and cried and been accompanied. Diane told me, "I don't know who she was. I don't know what she was distressed about in 1952. I don't know why she stayed in that room after she died, or whether she stays for everyone or just for people who are alone and struggling. I don't know any of that." She said, "What I know is that I sat in that room for 45 minutes on the worst night I'd had in years, and I didn't feel alone. I felt held. The way you feel when someone who loves you sits with you in the dark and doesn't try to fix anything, just sits." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I've thought about her a lot since then. A woman who died alone in a hotel room in 1952 in distress with nobody to sit with her. And I wonder, when she was dying in that room, that night in March 1952, I wonder if she wished someone had been there." She stopped. And if maybe what she does now in that room, for the people who need it, maybe that's her answer to that wish. Maybe that's her doing the thing that nobody did for her. She looked at me. The do not disturb sign on the inside. I thought about that afterward. It's what you do when you want privacy, when you don't want to be interrupted, when you need the world to leave you alone for a while. She said, but she put it on the inside, not to keep the world out, to keep me in, to make sure I stayed long enough to not be alone. I had nothing to say to that. I still don't. 10 hotels, 10 rooms, 10 nights in buildings that carry the weight of everyone who ever lived and died within their walls. A woman's reflection in a flooded tub, a salesman still trying to get home, the ghost of a last ball playing in an empty ballroom, a scholar at his desk in a room that shouldn't exist, voices in a sealed basement, a sea captain in his chair, a grandmother bowing through paper and lamplight, feet that couldn't leave, a photograph of sleeping honeymooners, a do not disturb sign flipped to keep someone from being alone. Hotels are where we go when we are between places, between home and destination, between one version of our life and another, between who we were and who we're about to become. We are at our most stripped in a hotel room. No familiar furniture, no personal accumulation, no comfortable domestic architecture to make us feel rooted. Just the four walls and the bed and whatever we carried in. And whatever was already there. I want to leave you with a thought that I can't shake since I started collecting these accounts. Every one of the presences in tonight's stories, the woman in the bathtub, the salesman at the door, the dancers in the ballroom, the scholar at his desk, the voices in the basement, the captain in his chair, the grandmother in the garden, the feet behind the door, the photographer in the dark, the woman who put the sign on the inside. Every one of them was, at some point, exactly where you have been. A stranger in a hotel room, far from home, alone in a building full of strangers. They checked in, they set down their bags, they looked at the room that was temporarily theirs, they lay in the bed, they turned out the light. And then something happened or didn't happen or ended, and they couldn't check out. The next time you check into a hotel, the next time you set your bag on the luggage rack and look around at the room and wonder, for just a moment, who was here before you. Maybe say hello. Maybe just acknowledge it. The room, the walls, the weight of everyone who slept in that bed before you did. It costs nothing. And if there's anyone still in that room who's been waiting for someone to notice them, it might mean everything. If you've stayed in a hotel and something happened that you've never been able to explain, a door that opened, a sound that had no source, a feeling that the room was not quite empty, you know where to find me. Leave a comment, tell me the hotel, tell me the room number. Because I've heard enough of these accounts now to know one thing with certainty. Every haunted hotel has more stories than it admits to. And the ones it doesn't tell, those are always the most interesting.